Technical difficulties. All right. For real.
For real. Welcome, everybody, to the Dome from Home. I'm your host today, Reese Barrick. I'm the director of the museum. And I've got Ian came in today to do his Dome from Home this morning.
Hi.
Well, I had some other work that I had to attend to. But anyway.
Work? What's that?
What is that? It's a novel idea. Mostly we just like to have fun. So thought we'd start out here today just to show you, this is our main dinosaur bone. I think Ian's already talked about this before on a Facebook Live. But you see a lot of cool bones, right? And they're really nice, and they've been cleaned up, and they're on display, and we think this is what museums show. It is. And what dinosaur bones look like. It is. But they haven't always looked like that. It takes a lot of work and preparation to get bones to look this way. So we thought we'd wander through and maybe take a sneak behind the door or the curtain to show you what it looks like in a fossil prep lab. So we're going to wander this way. Interestingly enough, you won't get the full tour. Sometimes we're going to have to do a Facebook Live when everybody gets back to work because, we have trained professionals that do this stuff on a daily basis, and they're not here because, nobody's here. We're all trying to keep our social distancing intact. So let's take a look from out here. So if you've ever come to the museum, you've probably at some point in time walked past the Dane G. Hansen Paleontology Research Center with the Oceans of Kansas Fossil Prep Lab. And you have these nice big windows, and oftentimes, hopefully, there's people in here working. And so you get a chance to see through and see what people are doing, but you don't usually get a chance to go back and see all of the behind the scenes part of what's in the fossil prep lab. So I thought today we'd maybe sneak back through the doors, open the doors, and take a look and see what's back in here.
Through the doors.
Through the doors. So, when we get back from the field, and we've had an expedition and we're collecting fossils, a lot of times fossils come back in this form. Looks very exciting, doesn't it? So, this is all chalk from the western Kansas.
So are we looking at the top or the bottom of the fossil?
Well, right now, we're looking at the underneath side. So, generally speaking, you can see that there's lots of this plaster, and the plaster is all the way around on the bottom, which was the top. So we plaster the top of a fossil, and then we have to cut underneath it, what we call pedestaling, and then we got to flip the whole fossil over. So the fossil is actually sitting with the part in the ground now facing up.
So that's the pedestal.
So this is the pedestal that's been flipped over. And that is all done to sort of take care of the fossil so that it doesn't break up into a zillion pieces on its ride to the museum. So we store these things in here, and then we have to do a lot of work to get those fossils out so that they look very nice to either get into our research collection or make it out into the museum for, here you go.
That's why you silence your phones when you go live.
It is. Let's just see. Hi, Laura. Just peachy. You're on Facebook Live.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Laura Wilson, curator and professor of paleontology here at the museum in Fort Hays State University. She never sleeps.
We're just in the prep lab here. We're opening drawers to show all the equipment and things that people use when they're in here. But anyway, anything particular exciting that you wanted to talk about?
I'm going to go over here now.
Okay.
So let me take you through sort of what the prep lab looks like.
Give you a call when we're done. All right, you bet. Bye.
Oh, hi, welcome back.
Oh, hi. That was our curator, Dr. Laura Wilson. Now, she would be a perfect one to be back in here today if we were all here at work at the same time. So this is the lab, as Ian sort of turned around and showed you. There's all kinds of cool things in it. For example, if we want to come over here and look, we've got, well, let's go here and see all the things that go into dealing with a fossil. For example, guess what? We have some Game of Thrones.
Paperwork.
Paperwork. Every time there's a fossil that is being prepared out, there's all kinds of information that has to be kept. We have our staff emergency procedures. We have safety data sheets, everything that has to be kept, and things that have to be filled out, applications.
Volunteer training.
For volunteers, if you want to be a volunteer sometime, you go through some volunteer training.
Lab cleaning lists.
Lab
The
cleaning
really
lists.
exciting stuff.
And the things that everyone that's a volunteer that works here has to do: clean up your workstation, record your hours, fill out your journal, put away your microscope, and high five another volunteer. We always have fun here. And if you are a volunteer, you get your own personal drawer. And you can see we have lots of, got to fill out your hours, and you get your mask, which is fairly handy. So you can see we've got a number of different volunteers. There's Jared, Alex. So all along the top row here are drawers for all of the different volunteers in the lab.
At this point, all of our volunteers are students, so they're all at home now, safe and quarantined. We miss them a lot.
Yes, there's a lot less high-fiving going on when you don't have the volunteers here working. So it's kind of a sad situation, but we're hoping to get back into the groove here soon. As long as we all stay safe and healthy, we can get out of here and get back to work sooner than later. We have drawers full of adhesives, so different types of glue made for different thicknesses, thin and thick, in different bottles, so we can sort of piece things back together.
So glues have changed the most since I was doing prep actively, which has only been about 8 to 10 years ago. And a lot of the methods and consolidation and gluing and, protective covering and coatings have changed since the stuff that I was using. It's amazing how quickly things change and new techniques and procedures come along.
And a lot of times we make our own glues, where there are also some commercial things that are appropriately named Paleobond. So,
Which I've heard we no longer use these.
oh, it's so sad because it's such a great name.
I love the smell. Shh, you didn't hear that.
We also have, with a lot of our fossils, once they're out, we do molding and casting. So we have different supplies for that. And one of the coolest things about working in paleontology and doing molding and casting is that if you're lucky, you get to play with Legos.
Woohoo!
Hey, you thought, your Lego days were over when you were, 10, 12, 15?
Never.
Never. Legos become a very important part of being a vertebrate paleontologist in a fossil prep lab. So all kinds of cool things that you might not have thought you would find. And
What is this white thing sitting here?
What is this white thing sitting here? This is, if you look underneath, it's plaster, and it's sort of a plaster, what do you call it?
A cradle.
A cradle.
I would call it a cradle.
And so it's specifically made for a specific bone. So if you have a really thin, fragile or brittle bone that could easily break, and it's really large or long, you can create a cradle for it so that once it's prepped out, it will rest here naturally in the cradle, and then you can lift it up and haul it to its place in
Yeah.
an
So what
exhibit or
we've
wherever.
got are archival grade materials here. So this foam is special archival grade foam, which means that it's approved for collections. And the way this cradle is constructed, you can see it's got sort of like a wooden board across it, and then it's wrapped in plaster, and it's also wrapped in fine sheets of fiberglass. So it's very, very strong, but very thin. And so this is actually sort of meant for not necessarily presentation in terms of display for the public, but more presentation for storage in collections and research. So it's just a very nice way to keep large, heavy pieces or articulated pieces safe and secure in collections.
Excellent. Up here we have some, a drawer that says prep training material. So for people that are learning how to do prep work, we have boxes and drawers full of bones that need a little bit of prep work that maybe come from places where there's not the appropriate information, or they're fairly easy to work on so that students can learn how to prep fossils out.
Lynn Gardner is viewing from Washington State and liked the Frog Toad episode and the segment on rocks and geology. Fun to connect with old stomping grounds. What part of Washington, Lynn Gardner? Just wanted to give a shout out to
Excellent.
our viewers from far away.
Here we have, this is actually going to be a Green River fish that has not been prepped out yet. So this is a nice piece where people will work and figure out, essentially train on prepping out very thin fossils.
You can see the very fine details there, the bones, and fish bones are crazy, especially the Green River specimens. These were one of the first kinds of fossils that I ever learned.
Green River is out of Wyoming.
Yes. And it's lake sediments is what they're thinking?
It's lake sediments, so very thin. You can see really thin banding of shales.
So I spent a lot of time with toothbrushes and fine dental picks when I first started. Lynn Gardner is watching from Edmonds, Washington. Is that west or east? North or south? I should know. I'm from Washington, but
Yeah,
it's
really.
been a while.
You ought to know this.
I'm starting to forget where things are in Washington.
We also have drawers with teaching specimens. So, for example, if we're working on a fossil turtle shell, we've got a modern turtle shell. So, when people are learning what it is that they're prepping,
Hey, I've seen this before. We have an exhibit called Bringing Fossils to Life, where we do very similar things, and this is a very good practical application of that. Lynn Gardner is next to Seattle, so you're Western Washington. I grew up in Spokane in Eastern Washington.
So we have teaching collections of different bones and shells and teeth.
And we have Warner watching from Brighton outside of Denver.
Oh, cool. Hey, Warner.
Wow, it's really cool to have this reach, isn't it? This is the, I guess, the silver lining of social distancing is we're talking to people that normally wouldn't see us on a day-to-day basis. So this is kind of cool. There's always something good, I guess.
We have the prep lab managers. So this would be Tia's drawer. So again, you can see the things that they get, masks. See, actually the prep lab's a pretty safe place to be now because everybody gets their own mask, right? Some tools and some safety eyewear. And also, important at times, is some safety earwear because we don't want to have people lose their hearing.
There are some loud tools in here.
There are some loud tools in here.
I never used earplugs, so that's probably why I can't hear a thing.
More sorts of safety type goggles and earplugs, and for anybody that's working in the lab. So we have all sorts of this stuff. We even have baking soda. Who knew we did that much baking in here? What's baking soda for?
I would imagine as an abrasive, is what I would think, but I could be wrong.
And of course, we have to have our first aid kit, which is very nicely next to the saw blade, because sometimes we end up using a saw in order to cut some of the rocks into smaller pieces.
Ah,
And
thin pieces?
And this might even be cut into very thin pieces, because a lot of times we'll end up cutting up the bones to make thin sections of the bone so we can look inside the internal structure of a bone. But we'll get to that later on.
This is funny. So this particular fossil has a story. I don't know much of it, but I do know this is one of the very, 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 very first fossils that I had any contact with when I first got here and started working at the museum in any sort of function. One of the things Reese wanted me to do, and this is before Dr. Wilson came on, this is before we had really an active fossil collection staff. He sent me down to collections to try to figure out what things were there and what was going on. So this is one of the first things I pulled out and started to clean off and try to fix up. Well, I got busy in grad school, and then I got jobs, and then I graduated and got more jobs and never got back to quite finishing this fossil. So now our student volunteers have finally cleaned it all off and are starting to put it back together. So I was reunited with this fossil actually while working with those same students on a different project, and I happened to walk with them down here, and they're like, hey, didn't you work on this when you were in grad school? And I just had to laugh. So this has been a fossil that is being prepped for, gosh, nearly 2 decades, I would think.
So what's fascinating about this is I know that Nicole back home was very wanting to get into putting some puzzles together to
So
fill some of the
this is a turtle shell, by the way.
And so I know a lot of you have been putting puzzles together in order to sort of break up some of the monotony of being at home all the time. This is a perfect example of a puzzle being put together by our staff and volunteers of a turtle. And you can see that, you know, we have some bigger pieces that they've already been putting together and gluing together. You've got you can see the turtle shell versus the rock that's actually the matrix, or the rock that was.
Well, and when we're talking about this, boy, I really, really miss doing prep work. I was really good at it, and for me, it was like the ultimate Zen activity.
Oh, it's very
I
therapeutic.
could spend hours and hours and hours. I think that's probably what made me a good preparator, was I didn't mind the hours. In fact, I would just prefer to not sleep and work on fossils, which is maybe good, maybe bad. I don't know. It might just make me crazy.
On the other hand, I was never extremely patient. So I had, we got to the point where we were trying to figure out how to glue them together. I could work on it for a while, but the prep stuff was not really for me because I'm just not a patient enough person.
In fact, you know what? I think aside from Green River Fish, one of the first things that I was working on as an undergrad at Montana State was a turtle shell. And at that point, they didn't want to let me use any of the high-powered consolidants, so I was using Elmer's glue. And if you've ever tried to glue a turtle shell together with Elmer's, it's not a fun exercise. So I had spent a lot of time piecing these turtle shells together, holding them together, finding ways to tape them together so it would glue correctly. And then my mom came to visit campus when she was in Bozeman visiting from Washington. And she went to go touch, I went to show her what I was working on, and she went to go touch the turtle shell, and I was like, please don't touch the specimens. And boy, she's never let me forget, because I told her not to touch the specimens.
Now these are some of the easy parts. This is like the outer edge of your puzzle when you're putting them together. You can sort of see maybe how they might fit together. Here's the internal parts, man. When you can get these things to all fit together and figure out where the heck they fit in the bigger picture, that's when you get to master level paleo puzzling.
This is what I'd be doing if I hadn't scored the education job. I'm sure of it. I would be in a room somewhere with this for hours and hours, and it would be awesome. I love it.
Let's see. We also have up here other things that we work with. Sometimes we have sediments that are already unconsolidated, and we just basically have to use sieves.
So
we
yeah,
wash
think
them
about
in the
loose
water.
sand or
Loose sand.
yeah.
and you'll catch teeth. A lot of times we're looking for little teeth, mammal teeth, any sorts of teeth, or fish scales, all sorts of stuff.
Depending on the sediments, sometimes eggshells.
Eggshells. That's very true. So we have a whole different set of sieves and things when we're looking in a whole different set of sediments.
Hey, what's this?
What is that? It looks like a saw.
What kind of saw?
It's a bone saw. And I don't know what kind of saw is that.
Well, it looks like it's got plaster all over it.
So we saw the big plaster jackets that we had over there when the fossils come in from the field. Well, we have to have a party where we have the, quote, opening of the jackets.
And everybody has to wear hats, party hats.
Everybody gets party hats.
And kazoos.
And so we have these saws, and they're actually used to open up the jackets so that we can get into the rock sediment, so that we can prep the fossil, start displacing the rock and showing the fossils. So first things first, got to open the jackets up so we can get to the fossils.
So for those of you that might have not tuned in or heard me speak before, about 1 out of every 3 statements I make is not true. So don't take anything I say seriously. We do not wear party hats and play kazoos while we're unjacketing a specimen. But, you know, seriousness kills me, so I can't do that.
So we have part of our training, which is all kinds of fun, is we have lots of microscopes in the building. So when we have a microscope here, we can have a bone specimen under here.
Anybody want to guess what that is? It's very ball and socket like.
Looks very much like some sort of piece of backbone, doesn't it?
Very marine reptile-y.
And
Tiley.
it looks very much like it's concave on one side and convex on the other.
We should live stream the party hats and kazoos sometime. Don't put ideas in my head.
But one of the cool things is you notice with this fun...
Can you see through that, or?
No, this one you can't.
Okay.
So with this cool microscope, you can see a person can be looking through here, down at the bone, which is very nice. And if there's some prep work going on, they can be doing the prep work, very fine detail here. And at the same time, you can have a student or maybe
supervisor
looking over here, and they're seeing the exact same thing of what's going on over here.
And like, oh, you left a preparator's mark on that bone. You need to make note of it.
Exactly. So,
Or, hey, wow, there's a bite mark on there. You should make note of that.
So the preparator and the student may start here and trade places so that they can get some good experience, supervised experience, prepping out fossils, which is a very handy thing to be able to do. We also have really cool microscopes here because pretty much all of our prep in the lab is done under a microscope, because there's all kinds of cool things that can be missed if you're just trying to do it visually without some magnification.
And again, this is something that has changed in the time that I was actively doing fossil prep. Now it's all under a microscope, which is really cool, because that really actually sharpens your focus, no pun intended, to where you see...
It was intended.
Okay, it was intended. That was not cleverly disguised. But you start to see greater detail, things like maybe soft tissue preservation and impressions and all sorts of cool stuff. So, as well as trace fossils or trace marks on bone, if the case,
Exactly.
in the case of mosasaurs especially.
So this is a mosasaur skull,
And it's cool. I'm excited about that.
and
Look
it's
at that.
pretty cool. You can see some teeth in here and all along here. And
Pterogoidal teeth.
what's cool is we have this big microscope on this big arm, which allows us to roll the microscope around the room, and we can lift it up here, we can move it back down, we can put it wherever it is that we want. And if we do really well, you can find a tooth. Want to see if you can figure out a tooth
Let's
there?
see here. Do I need to just do... Oh, let's see if I can get... I don't know if I can do this as good as Reese was doing it earlier. Okay.
There we go. Oh, there it is.
There's a tooth. Oh, there's something that looks toothiness.
Very toothy right there.
Oh, there
There
we
it is.
go.
Then we can-
You moved it. Why did you have to go move it?
I had to move it.
Okay, there we go.
I just thought we'd
Yeah,
change
you're
the-
tweaking my mellow, man.
Let's see.
Ah!
We'll go back.
Well, that's just a big blurry thing.
But we can.
Oh, there we go. Keep it. Don't move. Just.
There we go.
Teeth. Oh, toothy
You
goodness.
can actually see what it is
That is so cool.
that we look at.
I hope everybody else is as excited about this as I am. This is so cool. Wow. Okay.
So I'll
So there's this.
we'll get to that too.
Do you ever see Wall-E? Like they have like these big robots that have appendages like this. That's what it reminds me of. My world is a strange one. Nobody wants to live in my head.
We also have microscopes that are attached to cameras that are hooked up to computers.
So this looks like a very mammal-like jaw.
Exactly. And then we can actually shoot these and we can take pictures and we actually can run it to computer screens outside the lab so everybody can see what people are working on, what they're prepping out, which is kind of fun.
But neither Reese or I know how to work the stuff, so we're not going to touch it.
Exactly.
It's blurry. There we go. Come on.
Just for your fun, you know, if you want to know why you have to have ear protection here, and you want to know what the big blue thing,
The big Wall-E looking things.
they're actually put over where the fossils are to suck up the dust so that it doesn't get up into people's noses and mess up with their sinus system. But that has to be turned on in here, and in order to get the dust busting going, it gets pretty loud.
What?
What?
What? Oh, that's better.
Even if you close the door, it's still pretty loud.
I hope everybody appreciated my Star Trek camera work there.
It's impressive. And then you actually can feel that there's suction coming up through each of these things. So you can actually suck up the dust while you're doing your work. And if you're not careful, it becomes an alien thing and it comes over and it sucks up the dust. Exactly.
Okay.
Let's try it. Maybe turn that off.
What? And this is probably a good indication of why we're not allowed in here during normal operating hours.
All right. So that's sort of our sneak peek, give you a little idea of what's in the Fossil Prep Lab.
Oh, wait a minute. Didn't you say this was a research
Did I say that?
center?
It is a research.
Well, there's a sign that says it is.
There is. So what kind of research goes on here?
Oh, that's my question.
Well, our curator of paleontology, Dr. Laura Wilson, likes to slice bones up and look on the inside of them. Why would you want to do that? Well, let's go out here maybe and just give you a sneak peek until Dr. Wilson can come out and sometime do one of these.
Maybe we can talk her into that.
Talk her into doing it.
She'd be way more interesting than the two of us.
Exactly. But out here, and this is something anybody can see if you come visit us, is we have some pictures taken of the inside of some of our bones.
You mean it's not abstract art?
It's not, it really should be because it's absolutely beautiful.
Okay, so this red thing here,
Yeah.
what is it?
That is a dinosaur tooth of a Triceratops.
Triceratops.
So if you slice a tooth open, and the main thing here is when you're looking under a microscope, you can flip some things around to make them all the minerals inside the tooth very colorful.
So is this like a microscope like we were just looking under, or is this a different kind of microscope?
So this is a much fancier, more high-powered microscope, where we're taking the thin sections of the bone, put them on little glass slides so that we can look at them under very high magnification.
So this is a fossil bird leg bone of a late Cretaceous bird called Hesperornis.
And that's under some cool.
Again, a pterosaur leg bone.
And one of the things that's cool, if we go up to this fossil turtle leg bone, you see what look like all of these circles. Those are actually blood vessels inside the bone. So where the white is, that's where the blood vessel was. That's the organic where the blood's flowing through. And then the blue and the orange and the red are all of the minerals.
There's a couple of weirdos walking by behind us with rattlesnakes and garbage cans. Business as usual here.
Snakes have to eat. So we also see areas. This is a modern wing bone of a penguin. See all the little black dots? There's all sorts of different places where bone is being resorbed, sucked back up, and places where it's being deposited or precipitated back out. So the cool things with the insides of these bones is not only is it art, but it can teach us things about how bone grows, how fast bone grows, what type of structures.
It's interesting because the pterosaur leg bone looks a bit similar to me compared to a modern bird wing, in this case a chin strap penguin. Just, you know, from an amateur's perspective, you've got those sort of those vascular canals or whatever the proper word is. And you've got some very similar patterns, although I know nothing about paleohistology. So again, we should really talk Dr. Wilson into explaining how she interprets these and what information she does gain from that. That would be a really cool thing.
I think it would be a cool thing, and I think we could probably talk her into it once everybody's able to get back.
Right, well, when she's not crazy busy, whenever that might be.
Whenever that might be. But anyway, so yes, this is some of the research that goes on after we get all the fossils prepped out. So we get things on display, we get things in research, and we slice things up to learn more about the animals, or they end up back in our research collections where visitors and researchers from all over the world come to study the Western Interior Seaway or the Miocene with our rhinos and camels. But we're basically really reconstructing the history of the Great Plains. And that's kind of fun, and that's sort of what we do here in the Fossil Prep Lab. So, unless there's...
Do we have questions? Or does anybody have questions before we run away and go do other things? Anybody? I'm looking for questions.
So anyway, from the Sternberg Museum, we're glad you joined us today.
So much better than Ian's basement.
Well, yes, you don't want to be in a basement for too long.
I mean, I never really actually gave them a tour of my basement.
But
But that has nothing to do with the museum.
he's lost some skin color over the last few days.
My precious. We hate it.
Anyway, Ian, glad to have you here.
I am
today.
so glad to be here.
And we will see all of you guys tomorrow.
Tomorrow, one of us will be here at 10.
Somebody will be here at 10.
We're not sure who. We'll figure that out in the morning. All right, you guys, we will see you tomorrow. As always, please, please, please like and share our attempts at communicating with the outside world. We love you all. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.